Hello everyone, welcome back to the Mr. Flipwagon YouTube channel. I'm Mr. Flipwagon, but you can call me Mel. And the first video in this series did way better than I expected, which I take to mean that you guys are also very inquisitive and curious about the wonders that are the Easter eggs in the maps of this game. So without further ado, here's the part 2, in which we take a look at the newest map in game, the Seychelles. A map that also has already been out for like 2 years. Like, Wargaming, what are you doing? Just please give us some new maps! A map in which there are way more Easter eggs than in the previous one. Bear in mind that I will not talk about the Easter eggs like ships or structures that I've already mentioned in previous videos. I also want to thank my assistants for helping me research this video. The first Easter egg, if you can even call it one, is the fact that the Seychelles map is inspired by the actual Seychelles, specifically the Ladigue and Praslin Islands. But now, let's take a closer look on the things we may find here. Let our voyage begin. We start off on the Northwest Island, where on one of the beaches lays a small rowboat, and footsteps up the island lead to a little treasure chest. On the same island you can see this very small, very skeletal lighthouse. This lighthouse is based on the Denis Island lighthouse. This lighthouse was built in the year 1883 to oblige to the demands of a French shipping company, Messageries Maritimes, or something like that. I apologize if I butchered the pronunciation. But that shipping company had threatened to discontinue operating their services in the Seychelles due to shallow waters or breakers near the northern islands of Denis and Bird, which could prove very dangerous for ships, especially at night time. What was more was that Messageries Maritimes was extremely important, as they brought in most of the goods and the passengers to the Seychelles. Therefore, them ceasing service would be a detriment to the island. An attempt at building our lighthouse had already been made in 1881, but it had unfortunately failed. Originally, a structure made out of coral stone had been built, and it got to around 12 meters, but unfortunately the structure was quite heavy due to its material, and the island's soil was soft, sandy and unstable, and heavy structures on soft soil don't mix particularly well, which had resulted in the tower collapsing catastrophically, which in some unfortunate cases had led to severe injuries of some workers. In 1883 work resumed, but instead of building a heavy stone structure, a proposal to build a lighter structure was made, so a wooden tripod was set up on the island and a lantern was fixed on it. Only a few years later, discussions were being held in regards to rebuilding the lighthouse, as the condition of the current one was already decrepit. So it was rebuilt using hardwood timber and lit once again in 1893. And only 14 years later, the lighthouse would once again be worn down, and in 1910 it would be replaced with a steel lighthouse that still stands to this day. Next we travel to the island at C7, and on this little island you can see this little bar or hut looking thing. And while I'm unaware of any historical references it may be referring to, I still wanted to draw attention to it as it feels a bit out of place. So if any of you know what this little thing is, or what it may be a reference to, then please let us know in the comments down below. Next up we travel closer to the main islands, and here we see a little red float plane. This is a Beechcraft 17 Staggerwing, and it's no ordinary one. The reason it's called a Staggerwing is, well, because the wings are, you guessed it, staggered. One of the advantages of a stagger was improved visibility from the cockpit. The top set is slightly behind the bottom set, which is unusual, to say the least. Production of the Staggerwing started in the early 1930s and ended in 1949. The aircraft went through a lot of developments over the years while in active production, like the addition of retractable landing gear. Some aircraft also had floats installed, like the one in game, and some even entered military use, largely as liaison transporters. And now we move on to the main island. We'll start off with the little town on its northern side, where we can find a lot of Easter eggs in the form of various structures. This little anchor here is based off a real monument in the Seychelles. Its real-life counterpart is located in one of the commercial harbors of Port Victoria, and if you go on a cruise to the Seychelles, it's quite possible that you'll see this little memorial when you get off the ship. Further south, you'll encounter this little yellow church. This is the Notre de l'Assomption. In real life, it's located on the Ladigue island of the Seychelles. And while this is a real church in real life, not much information about it exists online besides reviews. According to one source, the building was finished in 1864. On the shores you can see these piers, and on the piers there are small buildings with various kind of posters on them. All these posters are inspired by real posters and are kinda like Chinese knockoffs of them, as they have minor alterations like Rickfords instead of Pickfords. I won't go through all of them, so I created this little screen featuring the posters and their IRL counterparts. So feel free to pause if you want to take a closer look. Before going to the next Easter egg, I still want to draw attention to this tower-like structure. While it doesn't seem to be based off of any real structures, it features a striking resemblance to the mooring masts that you see in the airship escort modes, which itself seems to be an exaggerated variant of the Cardington type mooring mast. Some historical mooring masts, like the one that existed in Quebec, Canada, seem to have featured a similar base and top, but I digress. We now move on to the city on the south side of the island. Docked at the pier floats this little boat. This is the super yacht named Olympus. The Olympus was built in New York in the year 1929. The boat was christened as Junaluska at the time, and it was designed by a John Wells for the President of the United States Stock Exchange. She'd served private owners on the United States East Coast before being purchased by actress and director Anita Stewart, who would bring it to California. During World War II, she'd be painted grey and saw service as both a patrol boat in northwest coastal waters, searching for Japanese submarines, and a personnel boat. After the war in 1944, she'd be relocated back to Seattle, acquired by the State of Washington Department of Fisheries. While she was supposed to be used as a vessel to patrol fishery zones in coastal waters, the governor of Washington, Monrad Wallgren, would rechristen her as Olympus and instead use her as a yacht. The yacht would carry various political dignitaries, including the then President Harry Truman. But on the other hand, the expenditures of using and refurbishing this boat as a yacht was quietly hidden away in the Fishery Department's budget. Luckily, some invasive but necessary journalism was conducted, and it was found out that over $100,000 had been used on this thing. Wallgren would lose re-election, and his successor would order the yacht to be sold. Ever since then, it has been owned and passed through multiple private owners, and is still preserved to this day. In the small town, you may see this silver-colored clock tower. This is the Victoria clock tower, built in the Seychelles capital in 1903, the same year the islands were inaugurated as a crown colony for the UK. It was named after Queen Victoria, and design-wise essentially was a replica of another Victoria clock tower in London. The clock tower was actually supposed to chime but failed to do so. It was painted its characteristic silver color in 1935 to commemorate King George V's Jubilees, and in 1999 the clock had its mechanism reworked and replaced, which actually allowed it to chime like it was supposed to when originally built. On the tiny island in the middle of the map, you may see another lighthouse. This is the Port Victoria entrance light, built in 1877, and serves as an entrance marker for Port Victoria. I can't find much more background history about it than that, although one account stated that the plan for its demolition had been made in 2022 to expand the port, but after some protests, a decision for it to be relocated was made instead. From what I'm aware, the lighthouse is still sitting on its original location by the time I publish this video. Right at the mouth of the bay of the main island sits a little steamship selfishly blocking the entrance. That steamship is the St. Clair. It was built in 1937 by Hall Russell & Co. Limited, Aberdeen, and you guessed it, Aberdeen in the UK. The St. Clair was owned by the North of Scotland and Orkney and Shetland Steam Navigation Company, and would be the company's last steamship. Yes, that name is quite a mouthful. She would operate in the northern UK, specifically Scotland, connecting the mainland to the Orkney and Shetland Islands. During the war, year 1940, she'd be taken into military use and renamed HMS Boulder. She'd take part in the British occupation of Iceland, and according to a forum post I've found, she seems to have worked as an accounting base with the focus on carrying out pay and provisioning accounts to other units stationed in Iceland. Later in the war, she'd play the role of a convoy rescue ship. After the war, she'd resume her service in the north. She'd be refitted to burn oil instead of coal, and her name would also change a few times. First, she'd be renamed St. Clair 2, so that another new ship could take the name St. Clair. And still later, after the previous St. Magnus was scrapped, she'd be named St. Magnus. And still 1 year before being scrapped in 1967, she would be renamed St. Magnus 2. I am not sure what was up with the Northern Company being so incredibly uncreative and confusing with their names, but I digress. Still, this ship had a full 30 years service, which in my opinion is pretty cool. The small tugs that are assisting the St. Clair, or are trying their best to do so, may look familiar, and that is because they are. If you watched my last video, you'll find that this little thing, the YTL 710, is another Design 320 District Harbour tugboat. But unlike the tug from the last video, we do know that the YTL 710 does exist, and still seems to be afloat today, although little to no historical records about it exist. Next up, I'll draw your attention to a few sailboats and yachts in various shapes and sizes. And unfortunately, this is also the area in my research that I've been most unsuccessful. We start off with this two-masted yacht. On the back you'll see the name White Heron. Well, you got a name, you got a ship. Surely it should be a easy find, right? No. Nothing. There are a few problems here too. The name White Heron is very common. First, it references a bird, and second, there are like a lot of White Heron yachts. At one point I found an eBay listing featuring a brochure for a double-masted ship called the White Heron. I thought I had done it, until I realized that there were quite a few differences, like the superstructure color and even the details in the aft area. So in short, I was left with nothing. For the record, I don't think that this ship doesn't exist. It's just that with my resources and with how unremarkable the boat is in terms of physical appearance and name, it's just gonna be near impossible to track it down. If you guys have any details about this yacht, feel free to leave them in the comments below, because I personally really struggled with this one. And the same story is unfortunately true with this little boat. While it does have a name on the back, it's rather tough to make out. I do have an educated guess though as to what model this boat is. I believe it to be a Manhasset Bay 1 design commissioned by the Junior Racing Association of Long Island Sound and designed by Sparkman and Stevens. They were first built in 1928. This mid-sized sailboat was a lot easier to identify, as the words Sirius New York is written on the back. This is, well, the Sirius, a Sparkman Stevens 45-foot New York 32 1936 model. That's quite a mouthful. As you may guess, the Sirius was built in 1936. The model, the New York 32, was designed by Olin Stevens as a submission for a contest organized by the New York Yacht Club in 1935 to update the fleet of yachts. And as you may or may not guess, this design won, and the next year the production of 20 of these yachts was started. Sirius was the 19th of these yachts, and was originally named Dolphin. After a few years, her name would change to Away and finally to Sirius. She'd participate in many different races from the 30s through to the 70s, and in 2005 she'd be transferred and used in the Mediterranean. While ownership would be transferred a few times over the years, she kept on being used as a racing yacht, and she was actually doing pretty well, winning, or at least coming second or third place in various competitions. Unfortunately, the Sirius had a tragic end. On the 29th of April 2016, the Sirius was going to sail from the south of France to Mallorca, but despite the Sirius being accompanied by competent sailors, she would never reach her destination. She had vanished without a trace. No wreckage was found, or remains of the sailors. Weather reports claimed that there had been strong winds, and a libeccio or a mistral could potentially have created large enough waves to potentially capsize the boat. We will unfortunately probably never know for certain what happened to the Sirius or its sailors on that fateful day. The last sailboat is quite big, and while I don't have an exact identification for it, I believe it is a J-class yacht, or at least a modified or custom version based on one. I say that because I couldn't find any images with these yachts with these kind of ventilation hole things, which could potentially be damning. On the other hand, some built models of these boats do have ventilation tubes, but still models can be inaccurate. The J-class came to be built as a consequence of yacht racing, and specifically how poorly regulated it was. The only parameters that were really looked at on racing sailboats were length and sail area. The thing is, though, they are not only factors that play a part in how efficient a boat can be. Things like displacement can play a factor, and with no regulations to regulate, designers would create extremely flimsy and light sailboats just to get the displacement down for better general efficiency. Some other modifications or design strategies would make boats very good at racing, but also very situational. So efficient at sail racing, but inefficient at, being an actual sailboat. And turns out in some cases, these extreme lengths could actually lead to accidents or even deaths. So this guy, Nathaniel Hershoff, decides to come up with the universal rule of measurement, which would both serve as a rating guide to discern what ships would get to sail together, but would also force designers to create safer and more generalist designs for their sailboats. Boats built in accordance with this rule would be designated by letters A through S, depending on mast number, size, and other stuff. And yes, the J-class is one of the classes. The J-class itself was a class of single-masted yachts with a rating of 65 to 76 feet based on the universal rule. In total, 10 of these J-class yachts were built from 1930 to 1937. If I had to guess on a specific boat this was supposed to mirror, I believe it tries to represent Ranger, which was the last of the J-class yachts built by the Americans. The Ranger would basically go on to becoming the apex of the J-class yachts, winning as much as 4 races against the British Endeavour II in the America's Cup. Ranger's design actually seemed to be so absurdly efficient, dare I say overpowered, that the captain wondered if it could kill the class and racing with them. Ranger would not win any more races after 1937, as the America's Cup would not be arranged for another 21 years. Ranger would be scrapped for metal around 1941. Now let's look at some aircraft, starting off with this chunky boy. This is a short Sunderland, specifically a Mark V variant introduced in 1944, although the camo is likely from the post-war times, around 1957. As you can see, the Sunderland was a flying boat. It could take off and land on water. Pretty cool. The first Sunderlands were mainly used as reconnaissance and ASW aircraft. The final aircraft is this little silver-colored float plane. It's a British Supermarine S6.B. The S6.B was a float plane specifically designed to take part in the 1931 Schneider Cup, which was basically a race specifically for seaplanes and flying boats. It was designed by R.J. Mitchell, who was the same person who designed the Spitfire. In prior years, funding for the aircraft design for this competition had come from the British government, but in 1931 funding was not given, as spending money on this kind of competition wasn't really justified. Luckily for Mitchell, he managed to gain funding from a private source. A lady, Lucy Houston, a widow of a millionaire, gifted £100,000. Unfortunately again, this gift came so late that it would be impossible to build and test a completely new aircraft from scratch, so Mitchell opted to take a prior design, the Supermarine S6, and improve it as the submission. As the competition day came, the possibility of a race faded. France and Italy requested a delay due to their submission aircraft crashing and their pilots unfortunately dying. While the competition had been delayed before, like the 1924 one organized by the Americans, the British Royal Aero Club refused to delay the 1931 Cup, which left the Supermarine S6.B as the only remaining contender. The S6.B won the Schneider Cup uncontested, and it was awarded to Britain permanently. And before exploring the last ship, I still want to draw your attention to one building, this little thing. And no, it's not another building from the Seychelles. This is a building located on the Dunoon Victorian Pier, and it's actually located in Scotland. There isn't insanely much to say about it really. The building served, and I believe it still does serve, as a waiting room and the pier master's office. It was built in 1896 as a part of an extension to the already existing Dunoon Pier, as a result to an increase in steamer and ferry traffic. The last ship we are looking at is the biggest one, almost smack dab in the center of the map. And it's probably also the biggest civil ship modeled in game. I'm sure my fellow ocean liner enthusiasts will recognize it right away. This is the RMS Aquitania, an ocean liner built by Cunard to serve as a direct competitor to ships of the White Star Line. Ships you may have heard of like the Olympic, or another little-known ocean liner, the Titanic. Cunard had previously built the smaller vessels Lusitania and Mauretania, which had focused on fast Atlantic travel, being able to reach speeds up to 25 or 26 knots. And while the Aquitania would follow some of the principles laid down by the two former ships, she would naturally be slower due to her greater size, and would instead focus on being extremely luxurious, like her rivals from the White Star Line. What is funny is that the Titanic had a little accident while the Aquitania was still in construction. Cunard looked at the tragedy and realized that they may want to pack more lifeboats on board, so they did. Aquitania would be launched in 1913 and would commence her maiden voyage in 1914. She would unfortunately only be able to take part in a few voyages due to the First World War breaking out. During the war she would play a few different roles, like an armed merchant cruiser, troop ship and even hospital ship. After the war, the Aquitania was modernized a bit and went on to become one of the most profitable ocean liners of all time. But she'd survive and witnessed the Cunard's and White Star Line's merger into Cunard White Star. She'd survived through the Second World War, working as a troop ship during it, and at its end she assisted in bringing back troops to their homes, all the way until 1949, before she was given back to Cunard. She would only serve in commercial use for one more year though, because she was starting to quite literally fall apart. She had served for 36 years, through 2 world wars, and a lot of metal had rusted and corroded everywhere, and her decks were frail. She was just not in good shape anymore. So in 1950, after almost 450 voyages, she would retire and would be scrapped. She would be the longest serving ocean liner like ever, and unfortunately with her scrapping, the once renowned and esteemed luxury liners from before the First World War would be gone forever. Those were all the Easter eggs I found on the Seychelles map. This video was a lot more difficult to make than the last one, and it was honestly really cool to see all the various Easter eggs here, especially the region-specific ones. As I said before, if you do have any information about the ships I couldn't find information on, feel free to leave your findings in the comments below, as I aim to potentially make a corrections/extra notes video on these maps in the future. Anyway, that's all for this video. What did you think of it? Leave your thoughts in the comments, and feel free to suggest what map I should take a look at next. Anyway, I have been Mr. Flipwagon. May Saint Anhalt bless you, and I'll catch you in the next video. Bye bye!